Hello and welcome to the Scale Toolkit series by the Global Schools Forum. My name is Julie Belanger and I'm a director at Better Purpose. We've been working with the Global Schools Forum as part of their Impact at Scale Labs program. Now, the mission with the Scale Toolkit series here is to empower early stage educational organizations in low and middle income countries, providing them with the tools and best practices that they need to scale effectively and sharing at the same time our learnings from the Impact at Scale Labs program. Today, we'll be diving into how to develop a monitoring plan, which is a component of the monitoring framework tool. So the monitoring plan is designed to specify how you will track your progress and your impact for your solution. If you've not done so already, I recommend that you familiarize yourself with the monitoring framework tool guidance, which it also has an accompanying video available before you dive into this one today. So I'm going to share my screen so that you can follow along with some slides. Here we go. So in previous guidance, we learned about the monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework as being like a project's navigation system or GPS system. Now the monitoring plan is one of the tools of this system, and it represents the operationalization of your MEL framework. To use this navigation analogy, the monitoring plan can be thought of as the highlighted route that you will select in your GPS system. And it shows how to get from where you are to your destination. Now, in that selection of which route you want to take, you'll take into account the distance that you need to travel, your time of arrival, and different options to maybe manage some roadworks or traffic jams along the way and some tolls, perhaps. So in this guidance, we will basically build that navigation system. And it really builds on your theory of change to begin with and your monitoring universe, which is part of your monitoring framework. And this will set your clear plan for tracking your project's progress. Now, there's three main parts of this, three main stages. The first one is prioritizing. You could be measuring so many things, and there's, an infinite number of things that you might be interested in. However, it might not be practical or feasible to do that, so you will need to prioritize. So this provides you with a way of doing this. This process will provide you with some guidance for that. The second step is defining your success criteria. So for each one of those things that you've decided are important to you, what will success look like? And again, we have some guidance for that. And finally, the third stage or step is to specify how you will be measuring those things and who will be responsible and held accountable for that. And we have some guidance there as well. So in your Excel tool that is available to help you do this, there are two main tabs that are relevant for today. So we've got here tab number 3, which is called the Monitoring Universe, and there's a separate guidance for how to fill out the first part of this tab. And the second part of this tab on the right side of the screen, you'll see that it has questions to help you transition to your monitoring plan. And so part of the guidance today is to help you fill that in. Then the second part is under the monitoring plan tab, which is tab number 4. And this is where you'll outline all of the details of how you will be measuring the things you've decided you will be measuring. So let's go through all of this together. So the first step is about prioritizing what we're calling your MEL questions or your monitoring questions. So there are several factors, in fact, 4 main factors to consider: your strategic priorities, your reporting needs, what might be feasible, and what might be practical. So let's look at each one of those in turn. So the first one is about your strategic priorities, and this is probably your more important questions you'll be asking yourself. So some types of questions you might be asking here are, where are you in your scaling journey with your innovation or your solution, and how secure or stable is your intervention design, for example? And how do you want to use the monitoring data that you will be collecting? So there's a series of questions here to help you really sit down with your team and reflect on them and basically try to draw out all of these kind of priorities and the questions related to that you feel you need answers to because of those strategic priorities. The second is, what are your reporting needs? So what do your funders need to know? What are they asking you to report on? What are potentially future funders? What might they be interested in that you might want to build into your monitoring now? You may have a board. What do they need to know? Or your beneficiaries, your schools, the people you work with? And also, what level of detail or disaggregation might you need? So it's good to have, again, with your team, a conversation of, based on this, what are the things that we really need to be able to report on? The third question is around what's feasible. So here, the kinds of questions you might be asking is, what data would be needed to really meaningfully answer the MEL questions? And there may be data that are already available. Otherwise, you might need to produce some data collection tools and produce evidence. And so asking yourself what is feasible within your resources and within your capacity is a really important question. And so with your team, you should, again, use this as a guide to help identify which questions you will be able to answer. And finally, the last one is about what's practical. So it might be feasible to do something, but it might be too expensive. It might take too much time. It might just really not be practical because of your geographical location. And so you might want to question, for example, what kind of burden is acceptable for your beneficiaries or your stakeholders in terms of data collection? What's feasible within your local context. Some schools might be hard to reach, for example. There may be conflict areas, all kinds of questions. And also internally, what kind of expertise and capacity do you have to be able to collect all of this information? And all of these need to be taken into account when you prioritize and you decide which questions you're going to go ahead with in terms of monitoring. Now, in terms of making a decision, once you've had all of those conversations based on those four kind of topic areas, you will want to think about, well, how do you select the final ones? Because you probably have a lot of them. And so some guidance that we have is that if a specific monitoring question has been identified as being both feasible and practical, then, maybe you can prioritize that. If it's neither feasible nor practical, well, then maybe you don't want to prioritize that. And if it's both feasible, but not quite practical, it could be that you want to consider further, maybe you could get some additional resources or additional funding for that. So you might have some additional conversations about that. But what's really important, and the first point here is about if a question doesn't have any strategic priority or doesn't respond to a specific reporting need, then it might be an interesting question to ask, but maybe that's really a clue that it shouldn't be prioritized here for your monitoring exercises. Now, once you've prioritized your monitoring questions in tab number 3, and you've decided based on this kind of series of questions which ones you will be focusing on, then you can take those questions and copy them into your tab number 4 here. And in this tab number 4, you've got the second column, which is about your monitoring questions, and your rationale, which is in tab number 3, which you will have filled in from tab number 3. So you can just copy and paste the priority ones here. Now, the rest of the columns need to be filled in this tab number 4. And the first part of that is to define success. So what will success look like? And that is your column number 4 in tab number 4 here. So we have a few tips to help you define success. So think about what your intervention aims to achieve and what this will look like in real life. For example, in the classroom, what will this look like? What will the teacher be doing? What will the students be doing, right? Don't worry too much about how you're going to be capturing this yet. That will be later. But make sure that your success criteria are specific enough to enable you to draw really meaningful conclusions at the end of your intervention. And make sure that each one of your monitoring questions, each one of them has a very clear success criteria. And once you've done that, once you've identified what success looks like, and in the guidance, you'll see that accompanies this. There's a written example for you to go through in case you need more details on this. And how you find the answers and who will be responsible for this also has a specific practical example for you as well. So in the third step here, it's really about the 5th to the 8th column. So the data sources, the indicators, the timing, and then the owner. And for each one of these, you will want to be asking specific questions. So what do these mean? So data sources. This refers to where you can find information that you will need to answer your monitoring questions. These sources can be assessments, they can be surveys, they can be interviews, they can be reports, they can be classroom observations. It's kind of like the source of data, and it can be qualitative or it can be quantitative. So different sources. You think, quite broadly about that. Second is indicators. Once you know what your sources of information will be, what are the specific indicators you will be looking at? So this precise, what evidence will you extract from your data source so that you can assess against your success criteria? And again, these can be quantitative, they can be qualitative in nature, but they have to be measurable. So it could be the proportion of teachers who report that, they feel more confident about a specific skill, or it might be the specific scores, the proportion of students who pass a specific test, a battery of tests, for example. So these are the specific indicators that you will be using to kind of compare to your success criteria. The frequency column is about how often you will need to collect this. So is it on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis? Is it just at the end of the year? And when that will happen? And then the fourth one is who will be responsible in your team or externally, who will be measuring this on an ongoing basis or at a specific time in period, at a specific point in time. Now, there are a few considerations in terms of selecting specific outcome measures. So when you think about what success looks like and what indicators you want to use, you want to think about three main things. You will want to think about, are you sure that you're measuring what you need to measure in order to answer your questions and basically be able to know what you need to know? Second is, are you measuring what is feasible to measure? There are sometimes things that there are no assessments of, or things don't exist. And, some things are very difficult to measure. So you need to make sure that you're measuring what's feasible. And measuring outcomes that will be trusted is important as well. Once you report on these findings and you report on what you've measured, will people trust that because of whatever measurement method you've decided to do? So for each one of these, there's a few considerations. These are not really necessarily all of the considerations. Let's say they're the most important ones. So in terms of measuring what you need to measure, some of the things you might want to consider is the relevance to your goals. As per your theory of change, making sure that you're measuring things that will help you determine if that theory of change is actually happening and meeting its goals. Then you have a question around specificity, ensuring that the tools can specifically measure the intended outcomes, that there's enough granularity there that will enable you to speak specifically to what you're trying to measure. Then there's the question of validity, where you want to be choosing measures that really accurately reflect the concepts that you're trying to assess. There's questions around sensitivity, whether they're sensitive enough to detect change over time. If you measure something, say at baseline and then at end line, and there's no change there, is it because your measurement is not good enough to detect that change, or because your intervention, is not working as expected? And then there's something around benchmarking and considering how the data can be compared with different benchmarks or standards in the wider sector or within a wider pool of schools, for example. So things to consider. For the second one, it's around measuring what's feasible. So looking at the tools that are feasible, giving the resources in your team and your technical capacity to use them. The ease of administration is important. So is it straightforward to administer? You don't want to put too much burden on your participants or your data collectors. Can the children or the students sit through an assessment? Those kinds of things. Scalability is important as well. So considering whether the tools can be scaled or adapted for using these in different settings or larger populations, especially if you decide to scale. Something around long-term use as well. So whether you might be using this for, again, if you're scaling or you want to look at something longer term. And then the last one is around asking whether this will be trusted. So the accuracy. Is the data collected? Will it be accurate if you do it the way you plan? Will it be reliable? So will you really get a consistent and stable measure of your results over time and across different contexts? Do you need to use something that's been standardized so that people will trust that it's been, really well tested out and used? And also really important is whether you're using stakeholder input. So for example, engaging the educators, the teachers, the students or parents or funders in the selection process for what measure you will be using can be very useful, because then you ensure that at the end, when they see the results, they'll trust them. They were involved in selecting those measures. And there's this whole piece around cultural relevance and language and all of those things. And they have, you have to make sure that your tools are culturally appropriate and sensitive to that context and the population being studied as well. So again, not necessarily a full list of considerations, but hopefully something that will be helpful for you to consider when you're trying to think about what measures and what indicators you'll be using to measure your progress and your impact. So on the website, you'll have a link to the actual tool, the MEL framework tool, and we'll have access to all of these tabs, and you'll have access to these slides that I have been walking you through today. Know as well that you have more information in the slide deck with some practical examples as well to help you fill out those columns in the actual MEL toolkit. Now, just to close off today, I just would like to say that we've explored here the monitoring plan. I hope that means you're better positioned to enhance your strategy for your solution. But if you need more additional strategy tools and inspiring case studies to help you in your journey to scale, you can visit the Scale Toolkit websites. There's a lot more information and a lot more, many more resources there. So thank you so much for watching, and good luck with your scaling journey.